Russell Clark's journey, ER nurse to 1,000 plus. Daily options income, from wiping bedpans in a Mississippi emergency room to generating over $1,000 a day in options income. That is not a rags to riches fantasy. That is the actual story of Russell Clark, options trader, published author, and the person who built VixShield so that other traders would never have to live through what he lived through. But before we get to the $1,000 days, we need to talk about the $240,000 loss in 6 weeks in 2008, sitting in a hospital parking lot at 3 in the morning after a night shift, staring at a brokerage screen, watching a career's worth of savings disappear in real time. Because that loss is where the real education began. Origins, rural Mississippi, and the lessons that last. Russell Clark grew up in rural Mississippi in a family that did not have much. What they did have was structure. His parents ran a disciplined household. You showed up, you did your work, you did not complain, and you certainly did not waste what little you had. At 15 years old, Russell started working at the local hospital, not in any clinical capacity. He was cleaning rooms, restocking supplies, helping transport patients, the kind of work that most teenagers would find humbling. Russell found it clarifying. He watched the ER nurses, how they moved under pressure, how they assessed situations without complete information and still had to act, how they never, under any circumstances, let panic become the default response. He wanted to be one of those people. By his mid-20s, he was. Russell became an emergency room nurse, and what that career taught him about risk management would eventually become the foundation of his entire trading philosophy. In the ER, you triage. Every patient who comes through that door gets assessed. What is the actual level of threat here? What are my available resources? What is the fastest path to stabilization? You do not treat every scrape as a cardiac event, and you do not treat every chest pain as a minor inconvenience. You read the situation accurately and you respond proportionally. You also hedge. You do not put all of your attention on one patient when three others are deteriorating. You set up systems. You make sure backup is available before you need it. Russell would spend the next 20 years applying those exact principles to the options market. 2003. The first trade. It was 2003 when Russell Clark placed his first options trade, Microsoft calls. He did not have a sophisticated thesis. He had read enough to understand the basic mechanics. He thought Microsoft looked good, and he bought the calls. $800 in profit. He was hooked. That feeling, the leverage, the defined time frame, the way a relatively small amount of capital could produce a meaningful return, was unlike anything he had experienced in traditional investing. Options were not just a financial instrument, they were a puzzle, and Russell Clark had always been someone who needed to solve puzzles. What he did not understand yet was that a single, profitable trade is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a new options trader, because it teaches you exactly the wrong lesson, that you know what you are doing. 2003 to 2008, the lost decade. Over the next 5 years, Russell traded with enthusiasm and without a system. He made $30,000 across those years. He lost $50,000. Net result, negative $20,000, and a growing sense that he was missing something fundamental. He was not, as it turned out, missing intelligence. He was not missing access to information. He was not even missing raw trading instinct, because in medicine he had demonstrated repeatedly that he could read a fast-moving situation and respond correctly under pressure. What he was missing was a framework. Every trade he placed in those years was essentially a gamble with extra steps. He would see a setup he liked, size into it based on how confident he felt, and hope for the best. When it worked, he assumed it was skill. When it did not, he assumed it was bad luck. He was wrong on both counts. Without a system, there is no skill. There is only outcome attribution. You win, you call it skill. You lose, you call it variance. And the problem with that approach is that it gives you no feedback loop. You cannot improve what you cannot measure, and you cannot measure what you have no system for. By the summer of 2008, Russell had been trading for 5 years, was net negative on his account, and was beginning to wonder if options were simply not for him. Then September arrived. September 2008, the night everything broke. On September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. It was the largest bankruptcy filing in United States history. The markets did not just drop, they fractured. The S&P 500 lost 30% in the weeks that followed. Volatility spiked to levels that had not been seen since the Great Depression. Russell had positions on. He had been holding iron condors, bets that the market would stay within a range, and the market, with extraordinary violence, left that range behind. Over 6 weeks, he watched $240,000 disappear. He remembers sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot after a night shift, 3 in the morning, the phone showing his account balance, the number that had represented 15 years of careful saving, gone. He did not call anyone. He did not panic into more trades. He sat in that parking lot for a long time, in the dark, and tried to understand how a person could be this disciplined in one area of their life and this reckless in another. The answer, when it finally came to him, was both simple and devastating. In medicine, he had protocols. In trading, he had opinions. Protocols save lives. Opinions get you killed. His father's advice. Russell called his father a few days later. His father was not a financial person. He was a man who had spent his life fixing things. The house, the car, the things around the property that needed attention before they became problems. His father listened to the whole story, and then he said something that Russell has repeated in every book he has written, in every video he has made, in every conversation about risk management. Fix small before it breaks big. That was it. No elaborate philosophy, no complex framework. Fix small before it breaks big. In the ER, Russell had practiced this every single day. You do not let a small bleed become a hemorrhage. You do not let a manageable situation become a crisis. You intervene early, proportionally, with the resources you have available. He had never applied this thinking to his trading. Every loss had been allowed to run because he believed it would reverse. Every position that should have been reduced had been held at full size because reducing it felt like admitting defeat. His father had, in 8 words, described the entire discipline that Russell had been missing. 2009 to 2014, Rebuilding with a System. Russell spent 2009 doing two things. He did not trade, and he read everything he could find about systematic approaches to markets. The book that changed his thinking most fundamentally was Nassim Taleb's work on anti-fragility and black swan events. Taleb's core argument that rare, high-impact events are not aberrations, but structural features of complex systems, reframed everything Russell thought he understood about risk. The 2008 crash was not bad luck. It was a predictable feature of a world where risk is systematically underpriced until it is not, and any trading system that did not account for tail risk was not a trading system. It was a timer waiting to go off. Russell rebuilt his approach from the foundation. He developed explicit rules, maximum position size, defined entry criteria, mandatory hedge structures, hard stops that he would not override regardless of how he felt about the trade. He back-tested everything. He started small and scaled only when the system proved itself over time. From 2009 through 2014, Russell generated 30 to 40% annual returns with his rebuilt approach. More importantly, he did it without a single catastrophic drawdown. The system was not maximizing returns. It was managing risk first and letting returns follow from that discipline. This is a distinction that most retail traders never make, and it is the distinction that separates people who are still trading in year 15 from people who blew up in year 3. 2015 Iron Condor Command. By 2015, Russell had been running his systematic approach for 6 years. He had documented every trade, every rule, every adaptation. He had more detailed records of his methodology than most professional fund managers. A colleague encouraged him to write it down in a form that other traders could use. Russell was skeptical. He had read enough trading books to know that most of them were either too theoretical to be useful or too simplistic to be honest. He decided to write the book he wished had existed when he started. Iron Condor Command was published in 2015. It became an Amazon bestseller in the options trading category. More importantly to Russell, he started receiving messages from traders who had read it, people who had implemented the system, who had survived volatile markets, who had stopped blowing up. That feedback loop became its own kind of education. He learned from the mistakes his readers made. He refined the framework. He began to understand which parts of the system were genuinely universal and which parts needed to be adapted for different account sizes and risk tolerances. 2016 to 2018, building to $1,000 a day. By 2016, Russell had established both the systematic foundation and, through the book, a methodical approach to compounding. He began scaling, not by abandoning his risk management principles, but by applying proper leverage within those principles and building out his hedge structure as position size grew. The math of compounding with leverage is not linear, and Russell understood this in a way that many traders do not. When you size correctly, when your maximum risk on any position represents a defined, acceptable percentage of your account, you can increase gross position size as the account grows without proportionally increasing the existential risk of any single event. He was also, by this point, using more sophisticated hedging structures, not just the basic Iron Condor mechanics, but dynamic adjustments based on volatility regime, ALVH tracking, adaptive long volatility hedging, that would allow positions to breathe in normal markets while providing genuine protection when conditions deteriorated. By 2018, Russell had built his daily income from options trading to over $1,000 per day, consistently. This was not every single day. Markets do not work that way, but averaged across the year, the systematic approach, the compounding, the hedging, the discipline that started in a parking lot in 2008 had produced an income that exceeded what most physicians in Mississippi made. The ER nurse from rural Mississippi had built something that most people said was impossible. 2020 to 2022, the philosophy shift. The COVID crash of 2020 tested every trading system on the planet. Markets lost 35% in 33 days, one of the fastest crashes in modern history. Then the post-COVID bull run created a different kind of danger, a prolonged low volatility environment that made premium selling look almost too easy. Then 2022 arrived. The Federal Reserve began the most aggressive rate hiking cycle in 40 years. The S&P 500 lost 20%. Volatility spiked and stayed elevated for months. Russell navigated all of it, not without cost, but without catastrophe. And in that navigation, his philosophy underwent a meaningful shift. He stopped thinking about maximizing returns. He started thinking exclusively about never blowing up. This sounds like a subtle distinction. It is not. When your goal is maximizing returns, you are always looking for ways to add size, reduce hedging costs, extend expiration dates, push your strikes closer to the money. Each of those moves might increase your expected return in a normal market. Each of them also increases your fragility in an abnormal one. When your goal is never blowing up, you build the opposite way. You accept lower expected returns in exchange for genuine resilience. You hedge even when hedging feels unnecessary. You reduce size even when you are running well, because the moments when trading feels easiest are often the moments when risk is most underpriced. The traders who blow up are not usually people who ignored risk entirely. They are usually people who managed risk correctly until they started feeling comfortable, and then relaxed exactly when they should have been most vigilant. Building VixShield. Out of this philosophy came VixShield, a daily signal service built around the principles Russell had developed over 20 years of systematic trading. The core of VixShield is making the systematic approach accessible without requiring traders to build the entire infrastructure themselves. Daily signals, ALVH tracking, adaptive long volatility hedging, that tells you when your hedge structure needs adjustment. Regime-aware alerts that help you understand whether current market conditions call for defensive positioning or normal operation. The goal was not to hand traders a black box. The goal was to give traders the same kind of systematic framework that Russell had spent years building, without requiring each of them to go through the $240,000 loss to understand why the framework mattered. The community that has grown around VixShield has provided Russell with a kind of feedback that no individual trading account could. He sees how different traders respond to the same market conditions. He understands which parts of the system are most difficult to follow under pressure, and those are almost always the same parts that are most critical. When the VIX spikes and every instinct says to close positions and run, the systematic approach says to check your hedge ratio, verify your exposure against your defined limits, and act according to the rules you set when you were thinking clearly. That discipline, following the rules you set when you were thinking clearly, precisely when following them is hardest, is the entire product. The signals and the ALVH tracking are just the scaffolding. The final message. Russell Clark is not a story about talent. He is not a story about access to capital or connections or special information. He is a story about what happens when someone with the right foundational discipline, the discipline he learned in an emergency room in Mississippi, applies it systematically to a domain where most people operate on instinct and hope. The $1,000 days are real. They are also the wrong thing to focus on. What made those days possible was not the $1,000. It was the framework that made sure the bad days never became 240,000 catastrophes. You do not build an income from options trading by chasing returns. You build it by surviving long enough for compounding to work. Three principles that Russell carries from 2008 to today. First, humility. Every trader who has blown up was, at some point, running well. Confidence built from a winning streak is the most dangerous mental state in trading. Stay humble regardless of your recent results. Second, preparation. The hedge structures, the hard stops, the position size rules. These are not accessories. They are the system. Preparation is the entire job.